Is there something in your life you never get sick of talking about? Like someone mentions the tiniest detail and you want to explode with every detail? There are several things in my life like that. The presidents are one, but we've already covered that. But another thing I never want to shut up about is Gotham 1919. So to begin, I'm a massive fan of anything DC Comics, and I think I've made it pretty clear I'm a big fan of history. So when you combine these two elements, of course I'm going to be interested. And that's exactly what Gotham 1919 is. It's a fan-made adaptation of the Batman lore set during the 1920s, a period that covers World War I and the Great Depression. The best part of the book is just how real it looks. It's not a comic. Everything in the book is handmade. From the costumes, the varying props, everything is made to look like it actually happened, and is being documented in the book. In fact, the full title is An Unauthorized Detailed Account of Gotham 1919 to 1939. Once again, framing Gotham City as this actual place where these events took place. Throughout the book, several established character backstories are ever so slightly changed to fit in with the time period and the real history that took place. And that's what I want to discuss with this video. This book is massive, and there's plenty of stories to discuss. But to begin, I want to discuss 7 particular entries that really stood out to me when reading the book. The way they change details to fit in is perfect, and I just want to explode with this thing. So let's begin a discussion of the real history behind Gotham 1919. I think it's only fitting to begin a discussion of Gotham 1919 with the main man himself, Bruce Wayne, the Batman. His origin starts out mostly the same. He's the son of Thomas and Martha Wayne, who lose their lives in a robbery that goes wrong. As he ages into adulthood, he inherits his family business, Wayne Tech. In this universe, they deal in the emerging communications business, saving the company from the Great Depression years later, and also making Bruce Wayne one of the richest men in the country at this time. In our real history, the richest man at this point was John D. Rockefeller, but he made his money through oil. A closer comparison might be someone like David Sarnoff, a Russian-American businessman who helped popularize radio and television in America during the 1920s. But that's beyond where we are right now. As the 1910s come to an end, World War I and American involvement begins, and this involvement involves Bruce Wayne and Harvey Dent. They both enlist for different reasons. Bruce sees it as basically a vacation, a chance to get out of Gotham to see the world. We won't spoil what happens to Harvey yet, and it's never really spelled out what exactly happens to Bruce, only that the war changes him in some massive way. It's my personal headcanon that Bruce kills someone. He nonchalantly goes to this guy playing soldier, and now he has just taken a life, forever scarring him, and later inspiring his no-killing rule. But like I said, that's headcanon. What is laid out is the fact that Bruce is fighting in the Battle of the Cambrai, a brutal battle that took place in November of 1917. This was the first battle that saw widespread tank use, and it resulted in 75,681 Allied casualties. 10,042 were killed, 48,702 were wounded, and 16,987 are missing in action. And one of these 16,000 was Bruce Wayne. It's said he's injured in the battle and was on the brink of death before being saved by the League of Assassins. He spends 2 years with the League, being trained in everything from combat to investigation, before returning home to Gotham in 1919, which is where the title comes from. However, the city he comes home to was not the city he left behind. In his absence, the line between the law and the lawless blurred into a disgusting mess. Criminals were having open warfare in the streets, and lawyers were undertaking their own wars of bids to keep them out of prison. Bruce knew he had to do something for the city he loved, so he put his plan 15 years in the making into action, becoming something better, becoming Batman. So this is probably in 1920 by now. He returns to Gotham in late 1919, waits for the fanfare to die down, and then becomes Batman, and this is his first suit design. He goes through 2 major wardrobe changes throughout the story, but this is the first, and it's clear where the inspiration comes from. his first comic suit. This is what Batman wore in his very first ever appearance in Detective Comics 27, which was released in March of 1939. So it's very fitting this is where they took their inspiration from. And it should be once again said that every costume in this book is handmade. There's no Photoshop or AI or any of that crap, it's all homemade, which really adds to the book. Batman is a character defined by his technology. He always has the best tech around, best computer, satellite, car, plane, whatever else. But we're in 1920, so what happens when we take away this technology? How does Batman adapt? And this is something the official DC Comics brand has recently taken an interest in. In August of 2024, Batman Caped Crusader is coming out, a series where the Batman lore is set during the 1940s, and it's being made by Bruce Timm. And he had this to say: "We decided early on there would be no computers or cell phones, and that changed everything." I'm excited to watch this series, and I really hope it's just this book, but now set in the 40s. But anyways, let's get back to the book. What technology does he have? Well, he has his utility belt in this cool picture, but the phones and scanners and whatever else is replaced by binoculars, first aid kits, maps, old detective tools, and other stuff of the sorts. He doesn't even have a radio. The highest piece of technology he has at his disposal is the Batmobile. Like we said, we're in the early 1920s, and cars are a blossoming technology. Batman's Batmobiles are usually speed demons, supercars, top-of-the-line models. But in 1920, people weren't driving supercars, they were driving Model Ts, which I kinda wish this Batman had. But there is a real-life car the Gotham 1919 Batmobile is based off of, the Hispano Suiza H6B Daubonnet Xenia. This was a one-of-a-kind model made for Andre Daubonnet, a French race car driver who wanted the absolute fastest model possible. This desire began in 1920, and the final model was completed in 1938, and it reached a top speed of 110 miles per hour. But like I said, this was in 1938, and the story ends in 39, so I'm sure his Batmobile was acquired a little earlier. However, we can, or at least I can, suspend belief that Bruce Wayne is one of the richest men in the country or even world. The technology was there, and he had the money to fund development for it, providing him with his Batmobile. I don't want to do a beat-by-beat analysis of the thin narrative in Gotham 1919. This video is meant to be an analysis of the history used throughout. But there is a narrative in the series, and it adapts a few major stories, including Death in the Family, The Shadow War, Nightfall, and The Dark Knight Returns. And all of these stories' characters are adapted. And throughout his 20-year career, Batman faces much of his rogues gallery. From the better-known foes like the Joker and Two-Face, to the forgotten relics like Calendar Man and Condiment King, who they actually make a threat in this book. The fights between Batman and his rogues gallery became America's obsession. With the popularization of the radio, families would gather around to hear the latest developments coming out of Gotham City. And one of the greatest minds behind the popularization was William Randolph Hearst. Throughout the 1920s, William built a media empire, hiring the best writers he could find and sending them throughout the country to report on various cities. And in this universe, Gotham was one of these cities. Week after week, any media centering on Gotham outperformed any other city, spreading the exploits of the Batman through the entire United States. This obsession soon consumed J. Edgar Hoover, the leader of the new Bureau of Investigation. Under the leadership of Director Hoover, local and federal agencies were able to crack down on crime all across the country. George Kelly, Babyface Nelson, John Dillinger, all names brought down by Hoover. But whatever he did, no matter how hard he fought, he could not crack Gotham City. Edgar hated the vigilantism taking place, feeling that federal intervention was the way to save Gotham. In fact, he blamed the city's insanity on Batman himself, and hundreds of thousands of dollars were spent on the investigation into his identity. But they never got him. The only thing that would take down Batman was Batman. Years of crime fighting and loss weighed heavy on him, and it was not getting any easier. The partial destruction of Gotham City with the Shadow War made every vigilante in the city unpopular. But this was the least of his worries. A new player soon arrived, Bane, and he would prove to be Batman's strongest threat. The night fell, and he decided enough was enough. He left Gotham in the care of Azrael, and he leaves Gotham for Europe. But this could have been the worst thing he did. as Azrael did not improve Gotham. He made it worse. Bruce will return 2 years later, and as his final act as Batman, he stops Azrael. Now a broken, bloodied, and bruised man, he hangs his cowl up in 1939. The ending point of 1939 is interesting, as this is the same year the first Batman comic came out, so all ends with beginning and all that. But just because Batman was done, does not mean Bruce Wayne was. During his stay in Europe, he becomes a founding member of the Justice League. Yes, they are in this, albeit briefly. Their story is going to be expanded further, as the creators of Gotham 1919 have 2 more stories coming out, with Themyscira in 1939 and Metropolis 1945, but that's way down the line. World War II breaks out, and the rise of fascism and death abroad makes the problems in Gotham seem so minuscule, causing the city to be forgotten about. During World War II, Bruce Wayne works closely with the Allied powers behind the scenes. He helps form the Office of Strategic Services. This was the Allied Powers Information Network and was formed in July of 1941. One of Bruce's greatest acts with the OSS was the hiring of Fritz Kolbe, a German diplomat who did not align himself with the National Socialists. So he began to feed information to the Allied powers, including that of the V-rocket programs, preparations for D-Day, and he helped uncover many spies. This was basically it for Bruce. Once the war ended, he briefly returns to Gotham, but is not quite up to his old acts as the Batman. In his last years of his life, Bruce develops dementia, and lives every nightmare as he sleeps, facing off against many old villains, but never coming out on top, furthering his cycle of torment he had lived for so long. It's not said when he passes away, but it's to be assumed it was soon after his brief return in 1955. So what a way to begin. Just this first entry with so many ties into our real-world history. I hope this less than brief first look helps sell my love on the book, but we're not done. Now that the big man is out of the way, we're gonna cover 6 of Batman's villains, among the best and my favorite entries in the book. We can now discuss my favorite entry in the book. It is the perfect example of changing something in the Batman lore to fit in with the established timeline. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time we discuss Harvey Dent, also known as Two-Face. Let's do a quick real-world establishment of Two-Face. The character is created by Bob Kane and first appeared in Detective Comics 66 in August of 1942, 3 years after Batman's solo debut. So he's one of Batman's original villains that has stood the test of time. Two-Face is of course made of 2 personalities, taking inspiration from the strange case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. But with the character's real history out of the way, let's get into his Gotham 1919 story. In Gotham 1919, Harvey Dent and Bruce Wayne are childhood friends. But while Bruce had a family of love, Harvey had a family of abuse and hardships. He never let this bog him down, and through his hard work, he received a scholarship to Gotham University, where he began pursuing a degree in law. He graduated with top marks and became the city's youngest district attorney. With a blossoming career in politics and war on the horizon, he saw it as a chance to go and come back a hero, furthering his career back home. So with his best friend Bruce Wayne, Harvey Dent went to war in Europe. It was here, on the front lines of France, where he faced his reality. He wasn't a soldier, he was a lawyer who gets horribly injured by shrapnel. Field nurse Leslie Tompkins did what she could to repair his injury, but it left half his face horribly scarred. This is the major departure from the main canon, because in the comics, it's usually an acid attack that damages Harvey's face, but this has been changed to damage from shrapnel during World War I. Now I absolutely love this next detail. In an attempt to hide his scars, Harvey, like many World War I veterans, begins wearing a tin mask that covers up his damage. This is pulled right from our real-world history. Since plastic surgery wasn't around yet, veterans who were heavily injured and disfigured from the war turned to Durant Wood, who led the Mask for Facial Disfigurement Department, which was nicknamed the Tin Noses Shop. This was ran out of the 3rd London General Hospital. Here, he would paint tin masks to cover up any disfigurements the soldier had, and in this continuity, Harvey Dent was one such veteran who got this treatment. The war ends for Harvey, and he returns home not a hero, but a disgrace. He is just one of thousands of World War I veterans forgotten and discarded by the government. His political career is ruined, his fiancée leaves him, and his best friend was still missing. Harvey was alone. He moved back in with his father, the place of abuse he had once run away from. Harvey was a recluse, bogged down by a once promising life, now nothing more but wasted potential, thrown to a wayside by a desire to become more. But these feelings of self-loathing and regret would be nothing compared to what was on the horizon. Bruce Wayne had returned. He should have been happy. His best friend was safe, but his lack of happiness was made up tenfold by the nation's happiness. Bruce came back a hero, celebrated by the masses, while Harvey sat alone in his father's house. This continued for years. Harvey got worse, being said to snap in the blink of an eye, almost becoming another person. Years after his death, he would posthumously be diagnosed with dissociative identity disorder. DID has gone through several different names in history, such as multiple personality disorder, and before this, it was thought to be possessions. It wouldn't be until 1994 when the first person was diagnosed with dissociative identity disorder, but previous cases labeled as multiple personalities have been changed to fit the DID diagnosis. And in this universe, it applies to Harvey Dent. Back in his time, we were in 1925, roughly 7 years after Harvey came home from the war, and these 7 years of being discarded, forgotten, scarred, and a lifetime of abuse manifested itself in Harvey's new personality, Two-Face. He quickly became one of the country's most ruthless gangsters, but no matter how ruthless he was, he decided every action with the flip of his father's silver dollar, giving everyone a fair chance. Batman and Two-Face fought for years, but the real fight was in Bruce Wayne, who had saw his best friend buried beneath the atrocities Two-Face was committing. But Harvey was gone, and soon enough, Two-Face would be too. While Bruce was away following Nightfall, Azrael released his own wrath onto Gotham, and Harvey was his first victim. After his strike down, his funeral was planned, and his death mask was made to include the scarring of Two-Face. Death masks were nothing new. They date back to the Black Plague, in which plaster masks were made to be placed over the diseased and decomposing corpse, preserving the person's face long enough for funeral services. And in this universe, one was made for not just Harvey Dent, but for Two-Face, forever interlinking the two into one. Alright, Two-Face is my absolute favorite entry in the book. It fits seamlessly into this universe, with just the right amount of change to make him believable. And his design is peak. I'm sorry, my words escape me. But his story, his 1920s pinsuit design, everything, it's awesome. I could write 5 more pages about this and still have more to say. But there are other stories to cover in the book, so let's move on. You cannot have an adaptation of Batman without the Joker, for better, or for worse, or for even worse. However, I'm happy to announce that the Joker in Gotham 1919 is far from the worst. We can begin with his design. And like most of the characters in Gotham 1919, they nail it. Would it be too bold of me to say this is the best the Joker's ever looked? He's creepy, but he still keeps that clown aesthetic perfectly. I think Joker adaptations can learn from this. Prepare yourself, I'm about to deliver my most controversial opinion I have. Heath Ledger as a Joker is incredibly overrated. Now, I know that sounds bad. I love Heath Ledger and I love The Dark Knight, but I just think other people have done it better. Mark Hamill is my absolute favorite across the animated series and the Arkham games. And Heath Ledger was great for his time, and I do like him, he's just not my favorite. And I especially don't like the copycats that have stemmed from him. Jared Leto is all I need to say, and Barry Keoghan looks like he's going to be another Heath ripoff, and I don't want that. But we're a bit off topic. Joker as a character first debuted in the first ever solo Batman comic in April of 1939, and he was almost killed off in this issue, but was hastily changed at the last minute, beginning an 80-year-long history between these two pop culture figureheads. The trio of Bill Finger, Bob Kane, and Jerry Robinson created the clown together, and they all have conflicting stories about his inception. But it's known the Joker was inspired by the actor Conrad Bates, and his portrayal is Gwynplaine, better known as the Man Who Laughs. There would even be a Batman comic later of the same name. Anyways, the creator of Gotham 1919 went back to the character's roots, basing their design off the Man Who Laughs, and it's clear. But now, let's cover his Gotham 1919 story. As for the in-universe story, Joker's backstory is not fully known, which is standard for DC Comics. They're cagey about Joker's exact origin, with the most commonly accepted one coming from the Killing Joke. What is said is that the Joker serves in World War II. Not the actual Joker, but the man before becoming a Joker. You know what I mean. Anyways, the war screws him up. It's not said how, but it somehow screws him up. My headcanon is that the Joker develops post-traumatic stress disorder, or as it was known in this time, shell shock. During the early stages of the Great War, many British soldiers began to experience a litany of symptoms, including tinnitus, headaches, and hypersensitivity to noise, and frightening images of this condition began to circulate. The soldiers experiencing the weird syndrome seemed to be in a daze, oblivious to their surrounding conflict, and in some cases, they were even smiling. This is probably the most famous picture of this sort, and this is of a British soldier in the trenches at the Battle of Flers-Courcelles in September of 1916, and this debated whether or not he's actually experiencing PTSD, and not to undermine him because he's a veteran in the war, but he kinda looks like the Joker here, and it would make sense that the Joker goes to war, develops PTSD, comes home to a government abandoning him like they did with so many other World War I veterans, turning him into the man he is now. Fans have also theorized that the Joker was exposed to mustard gas, since in DC Comics, he experiences a chemical change making him crazy, bleaching his skin, and sure, let's get with both. He goes to war, gets exposed to mustard gas, gets shell shock, and comes home and is forgotten by the government, turning the man into the Joker. Harley Quinn is also in the book, and she honestly deserves her own entry, but she is wooed by the Joker, and they leave Gotham, beginning a cross-country crime spree mirroring that of Bonnie and Clyde. They're basically the universe stand-in, because Bonnie and Clyde were active during the Great Depression, and that's where we are at in the book. But the Joker's real target was Gotham City, and his return had to be marked by something big. He kidnaps the Batman's current Robin, Jason Todd, and well, you know what happens next. The death of Jason Todd marks a major shift in Gotham 1919. The line in the sand had just been crossed, and the once colorful costumes turned into suits of armor, and the battle against the Joker continues for years. That is, until Batman leaves Gotham. It's said the Joker changed, becoming less erratic and more docile, adding fuel to the fire to the conspiracy that the Joker was the underworld's own response to the Bat. The Joker is left in Arkham for years, but when it's clear Batman isn't coming back, he disappears. He's never seen again, and all that's left of him is the quote he left on his cell wall: "All the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players," from the Shakespeare play As You Like It. As You Like It was a comedy play written by Shakespeare in 1599, and features the above line, arguing that life is just one performance. We play the part in our life, just as actors perform in movies, and this is fitting for the Joker's character. There's not much more to add on. Great entry. Harley deserves her own entry, and if you all want another Gotham 1919 video, she will for sure be in it. And now, we can cover the Penguin, another one of Batman's most iconic enemies. He first debuted in December of 1941, the same month as Pearl Harbor, 3 days after as a matter of fact, but that's not important right now. The Penguin's based off, get this, penguins. More specifically, the mascot of the cool cigarette brand. This penguin wore a top hat and carried a cane, while DC's Penguin wore a top hat and carried an umbrella. Co-creator Bill Finger also said that the Emperor penguins with their black fur resembled men of higher establishment, and this is what the Penguin was. Penguin doesn't feel like a word now. While not officially listed as inspiration, the character Dick Tracy had a villain with a bowler hat, monocle, who smoked cigarettes. His name was Broadway Bates, and it's thought this was the inspiration for the Penguin. Regardless, we can cover his Gotham 1919 story and the real-world history used throughout. In 1920, the temperance movement reached their peak with the passage of the Volstead Act, which prohibited the sale, manufacture, and distribution of alcoholic beverages. However, just because these laws were put into place, does not mean alcohol consumption dropped. Instead, it skyrocketed. Bootlegging operations began to pop up all over the country, with savvy businessmen noticing the decrease in supply for a product with such a high demand. These savvy businessmen were a part of the most recent immigration wave from Italy. During the late 1800s and early 1900s, the number of Italians entering the country exploded in magnitude. In 1880, there were 20,000 Italians living in New York City, and in 1910, This number reached 500,000 Italian-born and first-generation Italians. This number was about to increase once again, as Benito Mussolini had just taken power in Italy, and many citizens there were leaving to seek a better life in America. But some of them were going for business opportunities. You see, Benito began a massive crackdown on the Sicilian mafia, and seeing the recent news in America of an alcohol ban, operations moved here. So why are we doing a lesson on Italian immigration? Well, during one of these immigration waves, Carmine Falcone moved to Gotham. The Falcone crime family is one of Gotham's earliest criminal institutions, therefore becoming one of Batman's earliest targets. With the demand of alcohol increasing, there was an easy market to move into. And with the country facing an employment crisis like they had never seen before, there was an army waiting to be bought. But this lucrative market came with multiple competitors, who wanted their own slice. Rupert Thorne, Two-Face, and of course, the Penguin were about to wage a war Gotham had never seen before. The Penguin was a new player in the criminal underworld, but not a new player in Gotham. Born into the wealthy Cobblepot family, his life should have been handed to him on a silver platter, but this platter was thrown aside, as Oswald's grandfather did not approve of his daughter's lover, banishing them from the family. His father soon left, and Oswald was alone with his mom, in the slums of Gotham. She was convinced she would be accepted into the family again one day, dressing her son in the best clothes, which brought torment on from other, worse-off children. He was bullied, made fun of for his weight and his walk, which gained him the nickname Penguin. Oswald could have rolled over, let himself be a victim, but he fought back, a motto he applied for the rest of his life. Oswald gathered a gang and a reputation, wearing the nickname Penguin like a badge of brutal honor. By the time he was 25, he ran half of Gotham, but there were problems on the horizon. Falcone took notice of the Penguin's rise, but he had his own problems to deal with, like a potential coup. His greatest underboss, Edgardo Testa, or the Egghead, who had previously climbed the ranks of the Falcone racket at exponential speeds, beginning to consider usurping a Carmine, desiring a restructuring of the gang. In this process, he had actually worked out who Batman was, but before he could tell Falcone, he had him killed. More obsessed Batman fans are probably laughing, happy to see this guy, but more novice fans are probably wondering what the hell that was about. Well, Egghead was a real villain, first appearing in the Adam West Show, being played by famed actor Vincent Price. Egghead was a bald man with a great intellect who is obsessed with eggs. This is part of why Gotham 1919 is so great. They use the established Batman villains, sure, but they also make sure to take the forgotten and weird villains and shape them into something perfect for the universe. There's a few examples of this we may discuss later. Regardless, with his underboss dead and Penguin growing in territory, Carmine was less than confident in this upcoming war. It's never said explicitly what happened in the Gotham Gang War, only that the Penguin came out on top. As for Carmine, he was done. He suffered a massive loss with this war, but this wasn't the sole reason why he was calling it quits. Gotham had changed. The traditional gangsters were being replaced with colorful villains who took all the fear from his organization. As for the Penguin, he was on top of the world. Prohibition was still going strong, which is fueling the flames of Oswald's greed. But alcohol was still banned, so he couldn't sell it out in the open, but he could sell them in speakeasies. Speakeasies were the way to drink in the 1920s. They would be hidden rooms in legit businesses, often requiring some form of code to get in, whether a knock or a special word. It was estimated that over 50,000 speakeasies were operating in New York City alone. These were often owned by the mob, and the alcohol sold here was produced by them as well. Penguin had speakeasies all throughout Gotham, but his most profitable one was the Iceberg Club. The Penguin had the police force and judicial system in his pockets, allowing his crimes to go unpunished. Batman would arrest him, and his lawyers would get him out, and this cycle continued for a decade. But Lucius Fox and Barbara Gordon were about to break it. The Penguin didn't scare easy. He fought Carmine, he fought the GCPD, he fought Batman, but he was about to fight his greatest foe, the IRS. Lucius Fox and Barbara Gordon traced the Penguin's paper trail, only to find there wasn't one. He had not paid a cent of federal or state taxes in the past decade. Batman turned this information over to the IRS, and the Penguin was arrested. This may sound familiar to some of you, because it's the exact same thing that happened to Al Capone. Al Capone was one of America's greatest gangsters, and he had too been arrested several times. and he would get out every time, until he too was discovered by the IRS, being arrested. This is the end of Penguin's story. He was sentenced on October 24th, 1937, and if he followed his real-world counterpart, he would pass away soon after this. Scarecrow is one of Batman's most iconic villains, and is probably best well known from the Arkham games or when Oppenheimer played him briefly. Scarecrow is another one of the older Batman villains, first appearing in 1941, but it wouldn't be for another 20 years before he gets some of his most iconic features, which we will discuss soon. Scarecrow is another great entry in the book with some great ties, so let's cover him. In the 1920s, Dr. Jonathan Crane was one of the world's leading minds in psychology, and his particular study involved fear. In fact, he was the leading researcher for the Little Albert experiment. This was a study in classical conditioning, in which the researchers were attempting to instill a phobia into an otherwise stable child. To begin, Albert was shown several stimuli, including rats, rabbits, masks, and wool, to which the child had no reaction. Later, Albert was placed on a mattress, and a white rat was given to him, and he was allowed to interact with the rat. But every time he would touch it, the researchers would make a loud sound behind him, to which he would cry. This was repeated several times, and in future studies, when presented the rat without a noise, Albert would cry, simply seeing it. The fear was generalized into anything white and furry, as the child would cry when seeing rabbits, dogs, and even a Santa Claus mask. None of this is from the book, by the way. This all happened in our real life. But in the book, Jonathan Crane was the leading mind behind this. Little Albert was considered a success story at this time, and every institution in America wanted to hire Crane. But it was Dr. Hugo Strange who won the bid. Strange was the warden of Arkham Asylum, a facility made to treat mentally ill citizens of Gotham. But there were dark secrets within these brick walls. People who went to Arkham came out worse. Several of Gotham's worst, including the Ventriloquist, Two-Face, and even the Joker were treated here, but no progress was made on their psyche. In fact, they always seemed worse. This was thanks to Hugo Strange, the brutal warden. Once in his employ, Dr. Crane expressed hesitation of the facility, but Hugo encouraged him to go wild, do whatever he wanted. This made the asylum a playground to the Doctor, as he began some of the most brutal experimentations to take place in America. It's here where he develops a gas, which inhaled would induce or increase paranoia, which is a staple of Scarecrow. But it's explained in the book in more realistic terms, not just the fear gas. We've discussed the real history of the book several times, but now we can discuss real science. Something that me, with a business degree, is more than qualified to discuss. There's no specific chemical that induces fear in a person. None to where you inhale something and suddenly you're terrified. However, some drugs have side effects that include paranoia, but that's a side effect, not a catch-all that can affect every person. One such drug is LSD, which was created in 1938, which is in this time frame, but Scarecrow's story takes place in the early 20s, so that's a little further out. But once again, I'm not a scientist, and if I have any bioengineers in my audience, feel free to chime in. As for Arkham Asylum, it matches the psychiatric hospitals of the 20s. This country has a long way to go with how we treat mental health, but we've also come a long way. Asylums used to be overcrowded and underfunded houses of torment. People here were more test subjects than patients, and experiments were being ran on them constantly. Electroshock treatments were incredibly commonplace, as were lobotomies. It's truly awful that all of this happened, and it can be assumed that all of this, and maybe even worse things, were taking place in Arkham. After years of working at the asylum, Dr. Crane got bored. Being in Gotham City, this was a challenge. There was never a dull moment with the Batman running around, and this is exactly what Crane needed. He became obsessed with the Batman, how he used fear in his own right to fix the city. And Crane would do the same thing. He makes a mask, and goes out on the street at night conducting his experiments with his newly developed fear toxin. He was no longer Dr. Jonathan Crane. He was the Scarecrow, and he would come into conflict with his obsession several times. And it would end up with him back in Arkham, the place he had previously turned into his playground. But now, it was his turn to be played with. With such a long history of well-known villains, probably the best well-known of any comic character, it can be incredibly hard for a new villain to stand out amongst the stars. But the Court of Owls has done exactly that. The Court first appeared in Batman Volume 2, Issue 6 in 2012, a part of DC's New 52, and they have immediately become staples in any Batman story, appearing in several comics, animated films, games, TV shows, and of course, DC's most iconic piece of work, Gotham Knights. They've made a name for themselves, but who are the Court of Owls? In DC Comics, they are a secret society that were founded as Gotham grew. The wealthiest and most influential citizens banded together to shape the city into how they wanted it to grow economically and politically. The choice of an owl figurehead is curious, considering they are natural predators of the bat. But the court themselves rarely got their hands dirty. They had talons for that. Talons were the shadowy, brainwashed, undead assassins that are sent out to carry the dirty work of the court. But with their DC history out of the way, let's cover their 1919 story. Their story remains mostly the same, beginning with the American Civil War. Once the war was over, millions of people, both black and white, fled the American South for opportunities in the North. With the end of the Civil War, also brought the end of slavery. But the slave owners hardly felt the effects, as the American government paid reparations to slave owners, an average of about $300 per slave, which is about $7,000 today. The largest individual payout was $18,000, about $447,000 today. Now in Gotham 1919, these now incredibly wealthy Southern families banded together and they moved to Gotham City, which at this point was one of the best well-off cities in all of America. It's here where they used their vast amounts of wealth to establish the Owl Creek Country Club, an exclusive country club for only the wealthiest and most prestigious members of Gotham City. Of course, this was just a guise for the newly blossoming Court of Owls. It's here where the court began to shape Gotham in the way they wanted it, which was white and Christian. They even went as far as financially contributing to the newly blossoming National Socialists in Germany, who held their same beliefs. Several prominent figures joined the ranks of the Court of Owls, and perhaps the most prolific was Henry Ford. But back home, the choice of the owl symbol was not without purpose. Their court began to worship Moloch, an old god with biblical ties. The worship of Moloch was mentioned several times across the Bible, and was marked by the sacrifice of children. Now I'm sure the mention of owls and secret clubs and Moloch is sending up flares in the minds of my viewers engrossed in conspiracy theories. And yes, we can now discuss Bohemian Grove. The Bohemian Grove is a campground located in Mount Rio, California, and has served as the meeting ground for the Bohemian Club for over a century. The Bohemian Club was founded in 1872, and it consisted of journalists, artists, and musicians. It was founded for people who appreciated the arts. But as the club grew, businessmen and other powerful figures joined the ranks. 6 years later, the Bohemian Grove was founded, and it hosts a yearly meeting with some of the most powerful men in the world. Famous members throughout the years have included Richard Nixon, Ronald Reagan, George H.W. Bush, Theodore Roosevelt, and others. If you remember at the beginning when we discussed William Randolph Hearst, the guy who helped make radio popular, he was a member of the Bohemian Club. But what the Bohemian Grove is most famous for is the giant owl statue in the middle. Officially, this is where shows for the Grove are given, beginning with poems at its inception, but it has since evolved into special speakers giving presentations, and there's usually like fireworks. But everything I just mentioned is surrounded in controversy and conspiracies. These conspiracies took prominence when Alex Jones filmed a ceremony taking place in front of the owl as a part of his investigation into the Grove. Now, I'm not here to tell you what's factual and what's conspiratorial. I'm here to draw historical connections between our history and a Batman fan book. You should all make your own conclusions on the Grove's conspiracies. It's clear the Court of Owls is based off the Bohemian Grove conspiracy, and it's said the court worshipped the owl god Moloch. While Moloch was a deity figure in the Bible, they are never described to look like an owl. In fact, their appearance has never been described at all. But in the early 18th and 19th centuries, Moloch was depicted as looking like a bull. The owl symbol comes from the aforementioned Bohemian Club, as their symbol is an owl. And with the conspiracy that they worship Moloch, all of this combines into the Court of Owls inspiration in the book, which I think is lazy. But we have more narrative beats for the court to cover, and I will save my analysis for the end. Slavery was abolished in the United States with the 13th Amendment, being passed in 1865. but it's unfortunate and true that it still existed in different forms, under a different name, and the Owl Creek Country Club was still participating in the evil practice. The court began to raise African American children, conditioning them into servants for the court. During the day, they were the country club's groundskeepers, but at night, they were their talons. And at any time, they were beaten and reminded of their position within the country club. The talons carried out all manner of tasks, but they mostly served as the club's assassins, removing any targets the court deemed dangerous. This is a major departure from the comics, as the talons are usually undead soldiers reawakened to once again serve the court, but I'll save part of that for my analysis. At the court's inception in the late 1800s, they knew they had to get prominent figures in their ranks if they wanted to have any sway in the city, and one of their highest value targets was Thomas Wayne, the son to Patrick Wayne, who was in turn the son to Alan Wayne, one of the Gotham's so-called founding fathers. So a quick recap. As Gotham City grew, 3 families came together to help shape it. They were the Waynes, Cobblepots, and Elliots. This is probably early 1800s, and the Court of Owls is founded at the end of the 1800s, which, once again, will be a part of my analysis. So now in probably early 1900s, the Court of Owl wants Thomas Wayne to join, but he refuses, which sends shockwaves all across the court. They figured he would be an easy grab, but while they were out seeking their own member, another prominent family wanted in, the Sionuses. Charles Sionis wanted to join the court, on account he was one of Gotham's leading businessmen, but since he was considered new money, he was told he could join if he could convince Thomas Wayne to join. Charles tried, but Thomas wanted nothing to do with the court. Charles was then excommunicated. Not long after this, the Waynes are killed in their robbery gone wrong, sparking further anger in Richard Sionis, and more so in his son, Roman. He was overcome with jealousy of Bruce Wayne, who had just inherited his family's wealth. Overcome with this burning hatred, he kills his own parents and inherits his family's business, which he immediately runs into the ground. Now poor and alone, he created his own secret society based off the Court of Owls, but instead of a group of the rich and powerful, his consisted of the poor and angry. By the 1920s, white nationalism was rising across the country. The second wave of the Triple Ks and the Black Legion had set up splinter groups in every city in America, and Roman had his own, the False Face Society. He convinced the white population of Gotham that they were going to be replaced, and this perceived threat manifested itself in a responsive mob mentality. The False Face Society made outfits based off the Freemasons, and they came into conflict with the Court of Owls, but it's never really elaborated on further. Batman would reach dead end after dead end with the Court of Owls, and consider them one of his greatest threats. However, a silver lining made itself known in Silver St. Cloud. She was a socialite who started off at the Owl Creek Country Club as a waitress, and she saved every penny she made, beginning to dress in an outfit associated with someone in a higher class, and it worked. She was soon able to join the court's higher ranks, and she would even run into Bruce Wayne. She shared the court's secrets, and along with the Talon who had broken their conditioning, Batman was able to stop the court. So, the creator of Gotham 1919 has said he doesn't really like the Court of Owls. So I should be happy they're in it at all, because I love the Court of Owls. Maybe not these ones are racist, but their inclusion almost feels tacked on. Like they could have did a lot more with the court. We touched on the founding families of Gotham and how they helped establish Gotham in the beginning, but then the court comes along later, like 100 years later, 20 years before the book takes place. And they're supposed to be this all-powerful thing. I don't know. Something could have been done with the court and the formation. Maybe the founding families were actually the court's founding, meaning that Batman's great-grandfather started his greatest threat. Also, with the mention of William Hearst, he was a member of the Bohemian Grove, so why not make him a member of the Court of Owls? That way, the reason he's starting his radio show on the Batman is to draw interest to the icon, in an attempt for the court to find out more. Also in the comics, the court are usually responsible for tragedies, and you just get none of that in the book. Finally, one more note, the court is usually the ones responsible for Thomas and Martha's killings, so why not use that here? Thomas doesn't want to join the court, so they have him killed. Boom, I just made them a lot more interesting. Anyways, we spent enough time on the court, so let's move on to the last entry for this video. Deadshot has a smaller appearance in the book, but he uses his short time well. Deadshot is a relatively new character, especially his modern adaptation. But he first appeared in Batman 59 in June of 1950, but he was almost a completely different character. He sported a tuxedo, top hat, and used simple pistols, looking like someone out of the 1920s. If you know who Deadshot is, you're probably used to him looking like this, which this outfit would come out 20 years later in 1979. His real-world origin and Gotham 1919 origin remain mostly the same, save for the character's name, but we can now cover all of that. Baron Lawrence was born in Germany to an important, well-off family. He had a younger brother, and a lot was expected of him being the elder, but his father never accepted him, and would be quite abusive. One day, being fed up with his father, he climbed in a tree with a rifle, aiming it at his dad. He fired and missed, and accidentally hit his brother, killing him. From that day, he swore to never miss a shot again. The Great War was on the horizon, and Farron went to fight for his country and was given a special set of armor in the process. Two things Deadshot is really known for is his red eye and wrist-mounted guns. And with this helmet, we have the first. It may be a little silly, but this was actual real armor worn by soldiers. On the right is what German snipers would wear in the Great War, and it seems Farron's was modified so he could see better, I guess. Once the war was over, it seems he changes his name to Floyd Lawton, but begins operating under the name Deadshot, selling his services as a marksman to the highest bidder. To aid in this mercenary work, he develops a concealed revolver that was wrapped to his wrist with a pull string to fire. Now this may seem a little out there, kind of a reach, but concealed firearms have a long history, dating back to the 1700s. And a design very similar to Deadshot's wrist revolver was used by the United States Army. Towards the end of World War II, the Sedgley OSS, more commonly referred to as the fist gun or the glove pistol, was created. This was a single-shot, break-action 38 caliber pistol handed out to OSS agents in the Pacific Theater. These things weren't super widespread, with only about 100 of them being made in their lifespan. Like we said, it's a glove, so you just slide it over your hand, and you fire it by making a fist and pushing inwards towards yourself. These things weren't super widespread, with only about 100 of them being made. But if you look back towards the beginning of the video, we mentioned that Bruce Wayne worked with the OSS in World War II. So what if, in this universe, Bruce gives the OSS the idea to create this thing, based off Deadshot's wrist revolver? Just a thought, that's not said in the book, but it is my headcanon. Regardless of the legitimacy of Deadshot's wrist gun, he continued his operations across Europe, but his latest target was coming in, with a paycheck he couldn't turn down. The city of Gotham begins to call to him, with the gangsters of the underworld reaching out for his services. It's not said exactly who contacts him, my guess is the Penguin, but they pay him to take out the Batman, which of course, he fails. Deadshot is not mentioned again until the very ending of the book, where he pops up again for Task Force X, or what they're better known as, the Suicide Squad. They deserve their own entry, so we're not going to get into their story right now. And here we are. I know I was rambling there for a while, but there is just so much to discuss with this book, and I've just covered a piece. There is so much more I want to talk about, and I probably will make a sequel, but if you're interested in one, for sure let me know. Things I didn't cover include Catwoman, Commissioner Gordon, Man-Bat, the Riddler, the Mad Hatter, the Condiment King, Mr. Freeze, Harley Quinn, and so much more. Let me know who you would want covered in a future video, and thank you so much for watching this. Have a wonderful day, everyone.